The wine didn't simply spill. It bloomed. An arterial flower opened on the white silk of her gown and spread, vein by vein, until it found the grout lines of the marble and mapped them in dark red. Somewhere above, a chandelier trembled, scattering light like nervous laughter across glass and faces that had learned to be mirrors. Phones rose all at once, sleek, black, carnivorous, tilting to catch the angle of humiliation, the way gulls veer to a scrap of bread. Security, Eleanor Vancraftoft said, pearls and diamonds hard at her throat, every syllable lacquered. For the love of God, get this disaster out of here before she breaks something of value. It might have been a line she'd rehearsed. It had the cadence of entitlement, polished by usage. The room, a gold-lit sea of money and reputation, caught the cue and amplified it. Laughter ricocheted off marble. Men in tuxedos smiled the way people smile when they know they're being watched. Women turned their wrists, so bracelets sang approval. On the floor, one palm stinging, the other braced against cold stone. Alani Washington could smell the wine, Cassie, smoke, a feral sweetness. She could smell lilies, floor wax, an older ghost of cigar in the balconies. Money's private perfume. Red slid off the hem in disciplined drops. Each patter landed with a precision that made the room's laughter sound amateur. She stood. There was nothing dramatic about it. No flourish, no gasp. She rose the way a judge rises from chambers when the docket is ready. She smoothed the ruined dress with 2 quick passes of her hands, not to erase the stain. The stain wanted to be seen, but to remind the silk it belonged to her, not to the room. You are nothing, Eleanor told her, voice narrowing to a blade, smiling at the circle that had formed. Do you hear me? Absolutely nothing. Across the parquet, Harrison Vancraftoft, cheeks flushed by whiskey and the second-hand heat of being a person other people orbit. Stop telling a story about his father and steel and the old Chicago that lived only in donor speeches. He turned, saw the white dress on the dark skin, the red bloom, and the crowd's pleasure gathering like a storm. This is a private event, he intoned, a man auditioning to be a courthouse step, not a job fair. At the bar, when Alani asked for water, the bartender's eyes bounced first to Eleanor, then to the head of events, then back, waiting for permission that would not arrive. The chairs, she had already learned, were for guests. The room liked its rules visible. An hour earlier, at the velvet rope, the security guard had held her invitation between 2 fingers and studied it as if ink could lie. He had asked for ID, then rubbed his thumb across the laminate like a man testing a coin's authenticity. He'd compared the photo to her face with forensic suspicion and declared something off. Not loud, exactly, but pitched to be overheard. Through the glass, she had watched him laugh with the coat check girl, warmth in his posture, no phone call in his hand. Every 15 minutes he would step outside into the cold and tell her management was still checking, and then step back into a warmth that believed itself earned. She had stood in the wind for 90 minutes. Snow gathered on her shoulders like a vote. She came inside, carrying the weather like a shawl, and made it 3 paces into the foyer before Eleanor's voice found her and broke the room in half. Phones watched now. People watched through phone. The technology flattened the distance between cruelty and broadcast. It arranged consent by the pixel. Blair Vancraftoft arrived the way a cat arrives to a windowsill fluid, balanced, confident in the architecture, a Bordeaux cradled in her hand, her face practiced into an empathy that would play well in stories later. You look thirsty, she said, just loud enough, artful pity dripping from each vowel. After your ordeal. Here, for the length of a heartbeat, Alani considered believing her, not because she was naive, nothing in her life had afforded that luxury, but because it is a human reflex to reach when a hand extends. She reached. Silk flashed. A leg intersected a trajectory. The stem tipped. Gravity obeyed. Her palm met marble again. The wine made a second flower on the white, darker than the first. A stain now too ambitious to be accident. Laughter came in waves. A chorus of small, sharp comments landed at hip height, like thrown pebbles. The absolute nerve. Who let her in? Look, she's trying to keep it together. Carter Van Craftoft recorded, drunk enough to confuse audience with absolution. He said something about housekeeping into his phone, and the men around him laughed like a commercial. Alani's grandmother had once told her, the hardest thing is not standing up, it's deciding when to stand still. In kitchens where she'd scrubbed someone else's grease, behind brooms and closed doors, the old woman had learned the physics of humiliation and the counter-physics of dignity. If you can't move the world, hold your ground until the world feels moved. Alani stood still. She let them see her. She let the stain announce itself. She let the bartender's refusal hang in the air like a wrong note. You do not correct because the song needs it. She let the diamonds burn. She let the phones frame her and thought, briefly, of court exhibits and chain of custody, of how the world's appetite for cruelty could be reverse-engineered into evidence. Her phone vibrated. The sound was small and clean, a clear chime cutting through noise. She didn't have to look. She knew the cadence of that call. She answered anyway, because ritual matters. Apex Stratos, she said. Washington. The room's acoustics changed. Laughter collapsed into itself. A few nearby heads tilted interest disguised as contempt. Ms. Washington, came David Chen's voice, crisp as new paper, confirming. Van Craftoft, mea pagid compile, signatures qued. Press release drafted for an 8p blanks. M. Vire, do you authorize release? Across from her, Eleanor leaned in, voice dropping to a stage whisper engineered to carry, you are wretched, she said. Intimacy sharpened into a needle. Worthless. A stain on my floor. Alani watched a bead of wine tremble, fatten, and fall. Another. The Count steadied her. She looked up. Eyes cooled to winter. Cancel, she said into the phone. Each consonant exact, everything. David was a professional. The pause held only long enough to confirm the size of the word. Scope, merger, leasebacks, co-marketing, technology licensing, supply chain, sponsorship, terminate for cause. For cause, he repeated, as good counsel does. Recording. She ended the call. Somewhere behind Harrison, a glass shattered. The crack rang like a starting pistol. People flinched, then pretended they hadn't. Harrison stared until his eyes watered, as if he could blink the woman out of the sentence he'd constructed for his life. What? He managed, the word arriving hoarse. Did you say your name was? She removed a small black rectangle from her clutch. The card caught chandelier light and returned it with interest. Alani Washington, she said, handing it to him the way you hand a verdict without theatrics. Because truth does not require volume. Founder and CEO. Apex Stratos. He read. Eleanor read over his wrist. Color deserted two faces at once. Phones dipped. Paused, some out of shame, some for better angles. Alani turned slightly, offering the room a three-quarter profile the cameras would like. Yes, she said, voice steady. That Washington. Silence has its own smell-cooled wax. Extinguished celebration. The metallic note of a room remembering it is made of stone. A woman near the bar lowered her glass because her hand had forgotten how to hold things. A man in a tuxedo laughed on reflex and then, hearing the sound, stopped mid-note like a singer catching himself off-key. "You knew I was a human being," Alani said into the hush. She did not blink. That should have been enough. Outside, snow began the patient kind that doesn't beg to be admired. It settled on ledges and learned the names of windows. In one of those windows, a woman in white stood in a ruin of red and waited for the room to understand what it had done. No one spoke. The chandelier trembled again, or perhaps it was her pulse in her ears. Either way, the light skittered across crystal, looking for places to rest. It found none. Then, from the far side of the room, Eleanor's voice tried to rebuild the old order by sheer will. "This is ridiculous. A stunt. Someone like you." Alani did not turn. She did not need to. The room had already pivoted. Its axis shifted. She lifted her chin the smallest measure, just enough for the cameras to understand the new math. "A moment," she said, and the moment obeyed. In the pane behind her, winter pressed its face to the glass like a child. The snow kept falling, untroubled by wealth or witness. The stain cooled. The marble remembered 100 such nights of performance and very few of consequence. "Patricia," Alani said softly to a number she knew by heart, "execute the protocols." And for the first time all evening, the room understood that something other than it existed, something colder and older and less impressed. It had a name. It was not mercy. Wind made a bottle of the boulevard and blew across its mouth until the city sang under the gold-edged canopy. A valet in a wool coat stepped toward the curb, not to open a door, but to redirect a person, arm cutting a clean angle toward the alley salted white. "Service is around back," he said, eyes passing over the dress, as if fabric had a caste system. Alani paused with one gloved hand on the sedan's doorframe. The flash of winter bit through silk at the shoulder, a coin of cold pressed to skin. "I'm here for the Van Craftoft Gala," she answered, not correcting the man so much as correcting the geometry of the night. His face tried on confusion, then suspicion, and found both true enough. He shifted his stance the smallest degree and let her pass, as if granting a favor rather than rescinding a mistake. Inside the heated vestibule, lilies worked hard to perfume ambition. Floor wax carried the sun memory of 1,000 shoes. The building did what good buildings do for the old rich. It flattered height, multiplied mirrors, softened sound that didn't belong. The rope at the far end was velvet, which is a kind of sentence when it separates one world from the next. Greg stood behind a polished lectern with the laminated assurance of authority and a tablet glowing guest names in a font that had been tested to suggest dignity. His tie knotted too tight. The cut on his thumb, a paper slice from the night's stack, had been sealed with a bandage that bore an old coffee stain. He had been told by a manager with cologne-like impatience that the list was exclusive, that fakes were rampant, that several the type would attempt to slip through. The manager had laughed when he said it, to make the sentence sound like a joke and not an instruction. A white couple approached, breath visible for the 12 seconds before air gave it back to them. The woman raised a cream card as if lifting a glass. Greg smiled without reading, gliding the rope open, voice a warm towel. "Good evening. Welcome." Another pair followed, then a man on his phone, then a woman whose fur coat might have housed a family. Cards lifted like passports. Names were not checked but recognized, and recognition is a gate that opens itself. Alani waited until the pieces of conversation in front of her cut themselves off with apology. "Good evening," she offered. She placed her invitation on the lectern. The cardstock humbled fingers. The gold foil crest trapped a ring of light. Greg's smile dimmed by degrees. The way a dimmer slides, When a room tries on intimacy, he pinched the corner of the card like picking up something left sticky, and frowned as if ink could lie. The tablet lit his face in blue. "Name?" he asked, though the card said it twice. "Alani Washington." He tapped slowly. The stylus clicked staccato. A man behind her shifted weight in a tux that fought his midsection, and the tux was losing. The line grew by 2, then 3. Greg tapped again. A sigh performed itself behind her. "I don't see a Washington," he said, turning the tablet so quickly the screen flashed more reflection than text. "Would you look again?" she said. It was a request that arrived as a statement. She did not point out that the app had a search function and that he was thumb-scrolling, as if he were scanning the Dead Sea Scrolls. He made a second show of diligence. The stylus traced columns. The bandage on his thumb caught on a ridge of plastic. "No Washington," he announced, not loud. "Exactly," but pitched perfectly for the couple behind her to half hear and wholly conclude. "May I have my invitation?" she asked, voice straight as a level. "Ma'am, anyone can print these," he said, shaking the card once, the gold crest blurring into light. "Kinko's, FedEx." "You'd be surprised." Behind him, through the glass that served as a kind of aquarium wall, the ballroom rehearsed its illusions, candles rehearsing being stars, chandeliers rehearsing being constellations closer than they have any right to be. "I'll need to see ID," Greg said, already reaching for the folder that made a request feel like a policy. She passed him an Illinois license. He held it up to the downlight, tilted it, until the hologram danced its little legal jig, compared the photo to her face with an intensity usually reserved for bomb squads and rings. "This doesn't look right," he murmured, which is what men say when reality refuses to align with storyboards. "It's valid," Alani said. "We'll verify with management," he replied. "You'll have to wait outside while we confirm." He took both the invitation and the license, and turned. The rope might as well have been a drawbridge raised at the exact speed calculated to humiliate. She stepped back into the weather. Wind found her wrists. Snow auditioned for a film where it would be asked to play innocence and menace in the same scene. The canopy's heat reached only as far as the first pylon. Beyond that, winter held jurisdiction. Through the glass, she watched Greg not call anyone. He laughed with the coat-check girl whose lipstick had been applied to suggest she rarely smiled and then did anyway. He tapped the tablet for someone else. He accepted an apology from a man who arrived with nothing but swagger and a name. He opened the rope. Every 15 minutes he came to the door and slid it open enough for his head to taste winter. "Still checking," he said with an institution voice. "Shouldn't be long." Her grandmother used to say, "Some doors stay shut until you teach them your knock." Alani repositioned her weight and taught patience new shapes of standing. Her heels learned the width of the flagstones. The snow tested the structure of her chignon and found it held. A woman in mink steered her husband around Alani with the choreography of one avoiding construction. His devotion to the idea that detours exist for other people. A group of young men, drinks already making decisions for them, brushed too close. Their laughter, the kind of casual that has practiced. One turned to look back and registered confusion that a figure he had placed in one category remained where the map did not show her. Her phone buzzed once David's earlier text confirming packet readiness and went still. She read it without unlocking the device, training her eyes to make a home in the summary line. The screen's reflection gave her back a person the rope could not explain. Minutes ticked, and the way minute hands move in cold made time feel like a material that stretches before it tears. Inside, the string quartet modulated from respectable to generous. Schaumburg donors tiled their smiles across the room. The host committee clinked rehearsal glasses, empty of anything but pride. Harrison's laugh traveled better than it deserved to. 90 minutes is not long in a hospital. It is forever in a vestibule where warmth is visible and rationed. Greg returned with her license and invitation at last, his face arranged to appear as if he had performed a civic duty and spared her a worse fate. "You can go in," he said. The implication was that she had won a thing. She took the documents back, slid the license into the small, black clutch. With the habit of a person who has kept too many documents safe. "Thank you," she said, because the word is not for him. It is for the person she is when she uses it. Past the rope, the carpet changed behavior thicker, as if it needed to catch the weight of what walked on it and hold the footprints for later. The ceiling lowered to whisper, then lifted to awe. Light practiced the old trick of worshipping itself. The foyer's marble offered its polished persuasion, and the room beyond offered its argument that glamour is a moral defense, if you can afford enough of it. She did not pause to be impressed. She examined the room instead. The way architects examine load-bearing lies, staff moved in a choreography of invisibility, black on black, efficient, underloved. Security lingered where glances collected. The bar glittered like a promise about to be reneged. A photographer with a lens so expensive it should have paid property tax framed a donor whose philanthropy purchased visibility and absolution in equal parts. The shutter clicked as if counting votes. A socialite with a dress, engineered to be the only one like it in any room that mattered, took a sip of something pale and turned the world into a mirror. Alani's grandmother's hands, calloused, cracked by bleach, steady as doctrine, held a porcelain cup in her mind. The cup had cost a quarter at a church sale. It had been handled like it was porcelain before the name taught them how to hold it. She could see those hands in steam and know how warmth travels through material. Be the cup, not the hands that break it. That had not been what Grandma said. Exactly. The older woman's aphorisms came wrapped in a different grammar. It was what Alani had heard when the city grew teeth. She moved forward at a pace that belonged posture, the currency she had long ago learned to keep in surplus. She felt the sequence of glances, interest, dismissal, curiosity, judgment play across bodies like a light cue. A woman in sequins glanced at Alani's clutch, and then at the exit like checking for rain. A man discussing foundation governance used the word undesirable and meant unfamiliar, and then corrected himself internally, which is a start even if it comes late. At the edge of the ballroom, she paused where a mirror framed a slice of the room and the door. The mirror returned her as an equal even if the door had not. She adjusted a small thread at her shoulder that no one else would have seen, and turned as a server passed with a tray of champagne flutes foaming like carefully controlled weather. "May I?" she began. The server's eyes flicked to a point in space that belonged to a woman across the room, permission outsourced. The tray wavered the smallest degree and then steadied. "No, thank you," Alani said instead, saving the server a decision, saving herself the dance. She walked on. In a corner where houseplants had been arranged to simulate a conservatory without risking dirt, a woman practiced her smile into the reflective window, and then wore it out into the room. A man told a story about the old yard, about boilers and coal and men with hands like scars, and pretended not to notice the coat check by the door, where a young worker had wrapped her fingers in tape to protect skin from hangers that cut. Greg materialized at the interior post, the way security does when an anomaly refuses to resolve into the usual conclusions. He kept his hands at his sides, and his chin at the angle that keeps authority from looking like a threat until it needs to. He looked, this time, at her face long enough to see the steadiness there. He swallowed. "Enjoy the evening," he said, a phrase that could mean 100 things. "I will," she said, choosing the one it ought to mean. At the threshold to the ballroom, sound deepened strings in the key of legacy, glass in the key of celebration. Alani stepped forward. Light braided itself across stone. The room inhaled. She knew at once two truths that do not cancel each other. This is a room designed to make some people bigger and other people small. And she had not come merely to fit within its plans. The first truth pinches. The second arranges time. She navigated the edge where servers walk to avoid collisions, watching staff read faces the way nurses read charts. Her phone, buried in the clutch, slept under a single text that held more future than this room would guess. She ran a fingertip across the seam of the clutch, the way a pilot touches the fuselage before boarding. On the far side of the room, a woman with hair the precise color of old money turned toward Alani with an expression that had been practiced in small rooms and rewarded in larger ones. A circle of attention rotated a quarter turn, then half, then stopped with a click. You could almost hear. Alani kept walking. The air tasted of lilies and expense, and the faint mineral of stone. She took her place inside the frame the room offered and declined to become its subject. She had learned long ago how to enter a picture and keep the painter from owning her. Winter pressed its face to the glass and watched. The chandelier stilled, as if the building had taken a breath and elected not to release it. In the center of that held oxygen, Alani lifted her phone, thumbed the speaker, and let the room hear what it had not imagined it would ever need to understand. Apex Stratos, Washington. Some words have a frequency only certain rooms can hear. This one traveled along cut crystal and the polished backs of chairs, through tuxedo wool and silk hems, and found ears that pretended not to be listening. It made a soft place in the marble for consequence to stand. "Miss Washington," came David Chen's voice, crisp through the speaker. "Vankraftoft Mergapaget Compile, signatures queued, statement drafted for an 8 p.m. Vire. Confirm authorization to release." The nearest faces rearranged themselves, the subtle recalibration of people who haven't yet been told where to stand, but sense the stage turning beneath them. Eleanor's mouth made an elegant O of disdain. Harrison's jaw forgot what to do with gravity. "Cancel," Alani said. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. The word found the chandelier and came back cut and perfect. Everything. A wineglass found the floor and performed an honest shatter. The room flinched. Sound rushed away from the break like a tide. Scope. David's professionalism was a rope across a fast river. Merger. Leasebacks. Co-marketing. Technology licensing. Supply chain. Sponsorships. She said. "Terminate for cause." "For cause," he repeated. "We'll cite morals reputation clauses and a conduct MAC recording. Stand by." She ended the call. Harrison was already crossing the marble, his smile gone and his balance, learning a new math. Up close, his eyes were the color of a man who sleeps with numbers under the mattress and hears them whisper at night. "What?" he said, and his voice cracked like a boy's. "Did you say your name was—" She removed a slim black rectangle from her clutch. The card was weighty, matte, etched in platinum, an object built to be passed across rooms like this. To remind the room there are metals older than its money. She held it out. "Alani Washington," she said, "founder and CEO. Apex Stratos." He read. His mouth shaped the words as if they were foreign, and perhaps they were. in the sense that the truth always arrives with a passport you have denied at the door. Eleanor read over his hand, the diamonds at her throat. Suddenly, a costume piece, without a play. That can't be, she began, then stopped, not because she believed, but because her body understood a physics lesson her mind refused. Yes, Alani said for the room that had gathered like iron filings around a magnet. That Washington, a hush, slid along the parquet and settled on shoes that had never been asked to carry silence. A donor lowered her flute, not because she wished to, but because her hand understood a tremor. A hedge fund manager tried to smile and found that his lips had been repossessed by a different narrative. Eleanor rallied, because that is what people do when they believe the architecture serves them. She moved a step closer, as if proximity could make the truth flinch. "Someone like you," she murmured, and the phrase arrived at full volume anyway. "Does not speak to us like—" Alani turned her face toward Eleanor the way you turn toward weather, acknowledging the fact of it, not requesting its permission. "Patricia," she said into the phone she had already redialed. "Execute Van Craftoft cancellation protocols. All of them, effective immediately." Patricia's voice was clear and clipped, a metronome for a different kind of music. "Acknowledged, Ms. Washington. Scope includes merger, leasebacks, tech licenses, marketing, supply chain, sponsorships, termination notices for cause, referencing morals and reputation clauses, and conduct, MAC. Shall we prepare injunctive relief on encumbrances we control? Prepare TRO drafts," Alani said. "Initiate standstills as appropriate. Place non-essential remittances on hold. Media to legal. No adjectives. No adjectives," Patricia repeated, a small devotion. "Understood." Phones that had been pointed like weapons began to waver, some lowered to waists, as if ashamed to be caught working. Others rose higher to make sure they captured everything contrition. Fear, a dynasty's first wobble on its axis. Screens show the truth badly and quickly. Courts, like things the slow way. "You can't talk to us about clauses," Eleanor hissed, finally hearing the words she was making. "You can't. You signed them," Alani said, "or your counsel did. It amounts to the same thing." Carter, drunk on the purchased courage of cheap whiskey and unpurchased consequences, pushed through the semicircle of faces. His phone was already recording, the lens a black insect eye. He raised his free hand, finger wagging the way men wag when they have never been told to stop. "This is reverse. This is a bill," Alani said, not looking at him. "Coming due." He laughed, the sound high and unsure, and turned the phone back toward himself in a reflex of habit. His face, his story, his performative outrage. The camera box framed a man who did not know the frame had turned into a mirror. Harrison's fingers worried the metal card until they remembered to still. "Please," he said. It was a small word in a large mouth. "We didn't know who you were." "You knew I was human," Alani replied. The sentence traveled without friction. It did not ask for assent. That should have been enough. The chandelier trembled again, or maybe it was the room's collective pulse. In the window, snow inspected its reflection and decided to keep falling. From the periphery, the events director materialized, a man whose suit had been hemmed to accommodate the bending his job required. He lifted a hand toward the band, a conductor begging a different song. The violins faded into a silence that had substance. You could have cut it and passed slices around like cake. Alani's gaze moved through the crowd, the way a beam moves through a room you thought was well lit. She found the bartender who had looked for permission before denying water. He lowered his eyes. She found the security guard at the interior post. He stared back for a long second. then lowered his chin. She found the coat check girl at the far door. The girl did not look away, and something passed between them that was not forgiveness, but could be used to build a small bridge. "Miss Washington," David's voice returned, businesslike, but softened by a molecule, confirming, "Wires are on hold pending your written directive. We've frozen internal allocations related to the deal. Press calls are stacking, legal only," she said. "Statement as drafted. Send me the draft for sign-off. Line 5. Swap intolerable for incompatible with governance. No adjectives." She glanced at the hem of her gown, where wine had begun to set into the fabric like a bad idea becoming policy, "and reroute the capital we were about to deploy to a new vehicle." "Name?" he asked. "The Grandma Rose Fund," she said. "Underrepresented founders. South and West Side incubators first. Establish guarantee tranches with local credit unions. I want first checks out this quarter." Across the ring of faces, something like comprehension flickered, less about philanthropy, more about power reallocated beyond the room's reach. The donors recognized when a narrative stopped serving them. The sound that followed was not a sound. It was the absence of one. In the language of ballrooms, that is panic. Eleanor's hand went to the diamonds at her throat, a reflexive protection of something that could be counted. "You can't destroy us over a misunderstanding," she said. "One bad night does not." "This isn't a misunderstanding," Alani answered. "It's who you are when you believe no one can touch you. That's what contracts are for, to touch you when nothing else can." A logistics CEO tried to melt toward the side door, suddenly remembering a conference call. A hedge fund partner composed a text at heroic speed. A socialite set her drink down carefully, as if the stemware were the last fragile thing she could save. The head of security appeared at the threshold with a radio at his shoulder, flanked by two younger men in matching suits that tried very hard to say authority and almost managed. They looked to Harrison. He looked to Eleanor. She had nothing to give but a gesture that meant fix it. Authority turned in search of a host, and found none willing to be its face. "Ms. Washington," the head of security said at last, neutral as poured water. "Would you prefer a private space?" "I prefer the truth where it happened," she said. Sabrina Cole's number lit Alani's phone, a name reserved for tasks performed with scalpels, not hammers. Alani let it buzz once. Again, then answered. She didn't put this one on speaker. "I'm en route," Sabrina said, breath even. "Termination notice drafted. Exhibits compiling. We'll keep our adjectives in their cages. You all right?" "Yes." "Good. Don't give them anything to turn into a headline we don't write." "Understood." She ended the call and watched Harrison's face find a new geometry, the collapse of denial into arithmetic. He had been living for a year inside a spreadsheet that promised redemption if one number landed just right. He had borrowed against the promise, stacked loans like a house of cards, and called it architecture, and told himself that luck is a kind of competence. When performed in a custom suit, he could see now the single column that undid the others. It had her name on it. He opened his mouth to beg with more vowels, then shut it when he realized he could not afford the breath. Carter tried one more time to set himself on fire. "Will Sue," he said. You will do what you have always done," Alani said. "You will call the world unfair when it stops arranging itself to flatter you, and then you will learn a different vocabulary." She turned slightly to face the room, as if being photographed by something only she could see. "Some of you work for my companies and don't know it," she said. "Some of you rent my floors. Some of you invest my money and call it yours. Most of you have never seen my face. You have breathed my weather, silence answered. Ms. Washington. David's voice again. Ritual. Steadying the moment. Press holding, statement ready. Review. She pulled up the text and scanned. It was 8 lines, legal spine straight, morale muscle quiet. Apex Stratos is terminating its negotiation with Van Craftoft Enterprises for cause pursuant to Section 12A, citing conduct inconsistent with our governance standards and reputation clauses. Human dignity is not a variable cost. She changed nothing, except the line break. Approved. She slid the phone back into the clutch. The metal clasp clicked a small sound. Precise. She looked once more at the wine on her dress, then at the marble underfoot, then at the chandelier that had been waiting all its life to witness a night with meaning. Ladies and gentlemen, she said to the room that had called itself that too many times, good evening. The chandelier breathed again. Outside, snow pressed closer to the glass, as if the weather, too, wanted a better view. In the pane, 3 things looked back at the room: the crowd, the winter, and a woman who had just changed the physics. Sabrina would be there soon with envelopes that felt heavier than paper. The band would pack instruments into black coffins. The lilies would decide which way to wilt. But for now the room hung between what it had been and what it had become, suspended like a note held too long. Alani let the note go. They didn't sweep in, they settled dark wool, quiet leather, cases, the color of iron, 12 of them, each moving like a definition you couldn't argue with. The air changed temperature by a degree you could feel on your teeth. A staffer reached to turn the music up and stopped before his fingers touched the dial. In the pause after spectacle and before consequence, the law took its seat. Sabrina Cole led. Silver-threaded hair, and a gaze that measured weight-bearing lies the way structural engineers measure stress. She did not smile. She did not perform. She placed a folio on a mirrored console, with the same care surgeons give to trays. The console reflected her hand and the folio, and for a second, the whole room looked like a diagram labeling its parts. By direction of the board of Apex Stratos, she said, voice pitched for marble and microphones. The following agreements are terminated for cause effective immediately. It wasn't a speech, it was a reading, and readings carry a different authority. The authority of text that already exists. She read the merger first, each clause number a rib, each cross-reference, a tendon tugging elsewhere. She read leasebacks next addresses, parcel numbers, riders. She read technology licensing, co-marketing, supply chain, sponsorships. Words landed like stamps on paper you could feel through the table. Harrison took a step forward, then reconsidered, as if the floor had gone sloped. Eleanor's chin arranged itself into an angle that had won lesser battles. Sabrina did not look at either of them. She nodded to a junior associate, who produced a binder and began laying out exhibits on the glass clean. Labeled Nonfiction, Exhibit A, time-stamped stills from live streams and stories. The crowd's delight captured in vertical rectangles, handles blurred, watermarks visibly. Exhibit B, a short memo from Van Craftoff's events team exclusivity, positioning at the door. A bullet point that read, heightened screening, reduce undesirable walk-ins. Trust staff instincts. Exhibit C. Guest list logs with additions scrawled by different hands. Initials, scratch-outs, arrows that had meant convenience then and meant something else now. Exhibit D. The security sign-in sheet, 1 line circled in red, a note in block letters. It did. Looks wrong. The handwriting would match later without argument. These are appended to the notices, Sabrina said. They support termination under Section 12. one conduct inconsistent with apex governance standards and reputation covenants, amounting to a conduct-based material adverse change. She did not over-enunciate the phrase, she let it sit where it fell and become furniture. A donor tried to laugh and produced a sound he didn't recognize. Another reached for a drink and missed the stem. You could chart a room's belief system by its hands. Council will not be lecturing us in our home. Eleanor's sentence cracked on its polished edge. She stepped closer. Glitter. Finding new angles. We have counsel of our own. I welcome their reading, Sabrina said, and meant it. They will find the same clauses, different adjectives. A server set a tray on a sideboard with reverence. As if not to anger the new god, the band remained in place, instruments in their laps, an orchestra in a lifeboat, waiting for the command to row. A second team paralegals with messenger bags and a runner's efficiency began to serve envelopes in pairs, as if process service had learned choreography. One to Harrison, one to Eleanor, one to a VP, with a watch heavy enough to anchor a small boat. Each recipient signed a page with a pen that wrote in the exact blue that courts like freeze their assets. Harrison said, not to Sabrina in particular, not to anyone who could obey. Panic chooses the verbs it remembers from old newspapers. We're not freezing your assets, Sabrina answered, tone polite, like correcting a child's tense. We're withdrawing ours. We're calling covenants, initiating standstills, and seeking temporary restraining orders to protect assets subject to our control and prevent dissipation. Different FERPs, different statutes. There was an odd grace to it. This reintroduction of precision into a room allergic to it, the donors had come to bathe in generalities, legacy, generosity, vision. The law asked for nouns and dates and signatures, and in doing so made the air taste like metal. A man in a velvet dinner jacket, whose money specialized in the kind of distressed assets that look like bargains if you ignore the fire, found his voice. This is reputational overreach. You'll be sued 6 ways to. Sabrina looked at him the way one looks at weather radar on a phone. I count 4, she said lightly. Breach, tortious interference, defamation if they're reckless with their press, possibly promissory estoppel. If someone imagines a promise where there isn't one, they can sue. That's what courts are for. It will not uncommit the conduct. One of her associates, a young man with soft glasses and a tie tied a millimeter too short, set a portable scanner on a console and began to digitize signatures as they were made. It beeped twice a cheerful sound, wrong in the room, exactly perfect for the work. At the edge of the crowd, the head of security kept his team stacked in the doorway. Like parentheses around a phrase, he exchanged a look with Sabrina that said, "We are both professionals, and neither of us will be made into theater tonight." She inclined her head 1 degree. He matched it. Notices to counterparties are cued. Another associate murmured to Sabrina. Voice pitched away from microphone. Escrow instructions updated. Media holding statement pre-cleared. Send the statement at the hour, she said. No adjectives. She repeated it almost absently, a catechism that kept the wolves outside the fence. A courier arrived in running shoes, jacket flaring winter at the doorway, and handed Sabrina a thin stack wet with snow at the edges. She peeled the plastic, scanned the top document, and slid it into the folio. Tro draft is ready, she told Alani without looking up. Judge Singh is on emergency call. He will hate the hour. Love the clause. File, Alani said. A woman near the bar who had once believed she curated culture watched the exhibits with a face unpracticed at empathy. Her fingers fluttered helplessly at her own necklace, gold laid against a throat going pale. She set her glass down with care, as if it were the last thing in the room she knew how to control. The paralegal in the soft glasses approached Harrison with a clipboard that made a tyranny of civilities, receipt for notice of termination. He said, polite, "A signature acknowledges receipt, not agreement." Harrison took the pen. It weighed nothing and everything. He signed with a surname that had appeared for 100 years, at the bottom of checks and atop buildings, and at the center of social calendars. The letters looked unfamiliar tonight, as if someone had changed the font of his life. The paralegal thanked him with sincerity and moved on. "Mr. Van Craftoft," Sabrina said, still reading, never losing place or patience. "You'll find in the packet a list of encumbrances on which we will seek preservation. Your counsel may propose interim solutions. We are disinterested in your optics. We are interested in your obligations. You are making a mistake," Eleanor said. It came out more raw than she intended, a vein of panic showing through powder. "You will find that we will find what we already have," Sabrina cut in gently. "That's what findings are, Ms. Van Craftoft. They existed before the court writes them down." A junior associate slid a final envelope onto the console with the exhibits and tapped Exhibit B, the door memo, twice, underlining a sentence without a pen. The document did not blush, but a woman on the host committee did. From the hallway, a printer hummed the sound of the century's metronome spitting copies that would be collated, bound, stamped, and driven to a night judge who kept black coffee and procedural memory in the same kitchen cabinet. The hum filled the pauses. Where people often place apologies, no one placed one. "Counsel," the head of security said into the shallow quiet, "if you need a private room for signatures, we'll finish where it happened," Sabrina said, not as flourish but as record-keeping. "Chain of custody prefers direct lines." A donor whose life consisted of getting onto lists no one else could argue, with a man whose life consisted of removing names from lists when the men upstairs said so. Their voices were quiet, not out of courtesy, but because fear lowers the volume. A woman at the edge took out her phone and started composing a statement about values. She deleted it and typed an email to her lawyer instead. On a side table, the lilies bent toward water and found it wanting. The chandelier trembled. A crystal nerve ending, registering current. "Ms. Washington," Sabrina said, closing the folio with a soft leather sigh, "we will move for a protective order on any discovery designed to harass. PR will route to legal. We'll brief the line with 2 sentences and a citation. Vendors with clean contracts will approach for novation or buyout. People, we protect. Paper, we minimize." "Good," Alani replied. Her voice had no metal in it. The metal occupied the documents. "Board will ratify on an emergency call. We'll have the record." "We have it now," Sabrina said, glancing at the exhibits, at the witness bodies in a circle, at the cameras that had been both weapon and archive. "But yes, we'll have it again." A runner leaned in, Judge Singh's clerk online. "Chambers will receive in 20 minutes. He is reading." Sabrina nodded and, for the first time, allowed a fractional smile. Not of triumph, but of competence. "He reads quickly." She looked past the room, through glass to weather. Snow had thickened to a confetti that refused celebration. "We'll be out of your hair soon." She told no one and everyone. "Leave," Eleanor said suddenly, a flare of command, seeking oxygen. "Take your papers and your theater. Leave our home." Sabrina turned her head. "Not far, just enough to acknowledge the address. This is a stage, Ms. Vancraft, she said, but the performance is over. This part is just accounting. The junior with the soft glasses rechecked his stack, then caught Alani's eye as if to ask permission to do the last thing. She gave a slight nod. He approached the bartender, the one who had looked for permission before denying water, and handed him a single-page notice, a statement that his employer's contract with a Stratos subsidiary would be honored through transition, wage protected, tips not subject to whatever tidal wave was forming in the other room. He read it, lips moving, then looked up with a confusion he wasn't ashamed of. Gratitude and the possibility of a future fit poorly on faces used to ducking. He folded the page like something that could warm a pocket in winter. At the threshold, the head of security stood, radio quiet, men behind him stacked and ready to become furniture again. He caught Sabrina's eye and, with a professionalism that belonged to both of them, said, "If counsel needs escort to the elevator, we can find the way." She said, "We've been drawing the map all night." Her team gathered the exhibits. A hand hovered over Exhibit A, the screenshots, then withdrew. No need to touch what already belonged to the record. Fingerprints only confused truth. Sabrina looked once to Alani, two professionals acknowledging a job done and a war begun. "We'll call when Singh sign," she said. "Then you can sleep." Alani glanced at the window, where winter pressed its slow, patient insistence. "I'll rest," she said. "Sleep comes later." They moved toward the corridor, where the air smelled less of lilies and more of paint and freight elevators, and the honest work of buildings. The printer hummed once more and fell quiet, as if the night had found its final punctuation. In their wake, the room remained a museum after hours, waiting to label artifact. The chandelier let out the breath it had held. Snow kept its counsel. A dynasty learned a new language for gravity, and somewhere, in a clerk's office that had seen every kind of emergency, ink met paper with a small, decisive sound that belonged to no one and to the law. Glass turned faces into postage stamps. 12 rectangles glowed in front of Alani, across the long conference table city light, behind some bookcases behind others, the sterile quiet of corporate apartments behind the rest. The night had thinned to that hour when even a metropolis lowers its voice. In the window, snow stitched the skyline with thread that refused to break. "Calling to order," said Veronica DeWitt, chair of the board, voice like tempered steel warmed in the hand. Her small square showed a study lined with legal treatises and one framed photograph of a derrick at sunset. "Emergency session recorded. Council present. Quorum achieved." Alani kept her shoulders squared and her hands flat on the table, where the chandelier didn't dare gild them. The marble underfoot remembered other decisions. So did she. Veronica got there without prologue. Apex Management has initiated termination for cause of all Vancraft agreements. The board must ratify or reverse. Sabrina. On another tile, Sabrina Cole appeared under harsh office fluorescence, jacket unbuttoned, hair pulled back just enough to signal that the hour cost everyone something. Termination notices delivered. Exhibits compiled, including social media records, internal door policy memo, and logs. Grounds. Section 12. 1. Conduct inconsistent with governance standards, supporting a conduct-based material adverse change. TRO filings prepped to preserve controlled encumbrances. Press statement 8 lines. No adjectives. Approved by management. Thank you. Veronica's eyes shifted to Alani's tile. CEO. Perspective. Alani let breath. Not nerves. Steady her voice. The issue is not optics. It's governance. Our partner's conduct tonight poses material harm to Apex's reputation and execution capacity across our portfolio. We preserve value by ending the relationship and redeploying capital to vehicles aligned with our standards. The former Treasury official on the board, a man whose hairline had receded in step with his tolerance for euphemism, adjusted his glasses. Speak to cost. I see litigation volatility, counterclaims, plaintiff-friendly venues, eager to be villains. They'll sue because it's Tuesday, Sabrina said. Dry. The contract is a map. We stay on the road. We arrive. Our risk is public narrative if we get sloppy and let emotions dictate copy, share price, asked an energy baron whose fingers resembled the roots of a tree that had survived fires. Tomorrow's open will be a referendum. We take a dent, Alani said. We can withstand it. Brand risk already priced into our cost of capital declines. When governance is credible, our investors don't love surprises. They do love spine. I love cash flows, said the logistics matriarch. Tone neutral. Eyes sympathetic. How quickly do we triage suppliers who rely on these contracts to keep people paid? We've built the list, Alani answered, tapping a folder, where paper ties are clean. We'll novate or buy assets outright. Where relationships are messy, we preserve employment via bridge agreements through the quarter. People first, paper later. A younger director, a software founder turned philanthropist, leaned closer to his camera. This will be framed as a political act. The usual echo chambers will try to make you the story. Alani, that's a given, said Veronica. The board's concern is whether the corporation is adequately shielded. While our CEO carries the narrative weight, I've carried heavier, Alani said. She didn't add, and alone, that history belonged to another room. On a lower tile, David Chen joined. Tie loosened one knot. Eyes at the alertness that happens when a lawyer has been speaking code for hours. We've fielded press inquiries through legal only. Any director who gets a call should refer to the holding statement verbatim. No freelance adjectives. Good, said Veronica. Now capital. The Grandma Rose Fund, Alani said, the name landing soft and exact. Redeploy the $2. 5. B. Commitment into a fund for underrepresented founders. Initial focus on South and West Side incubators. We'll partner with local credit unions, create guarantee tranches for downstream bank lending, and align procurement to provide demand-side lift. First checks this quarter, the energy baron lifted his eyebrows. Ambitious timeline, necessary timeline, Alani said. Momentum is a currency. Governance of the fund, the treasury man asked. We need arm's length to prevent plaintiffs' counsel from calling it retaliatory spending. Separate board, Sabrina said. Independent chair. Community fiduciaries. Apex conflict protocols. It's philanthropy with teeth, not spite with a profit and loss. The logistics matriarch nodded once. Teeth are fine, as long as they bite the right thing. A notification blinked at the edge of Alani's screen. Judge Singh Chambers, reviewing. She let it sit unopened. You don't hurry courts. You give them clean paper and quiet. Second-order effects. Veronica said, which innocents stand in the blast radius? And where do we put the fire breaks? Employees at Van Craftoff's healthier subsidiaries, Alani answered. Vendors with good faith deliverables midstream. We'll open a hotline in the morning staffed by procurement and HR to triage cases. In parallel, we'll designate funds for buyouts where value exists without the family's name attached. The software founder frowned thoughtfully. Street-level reaction will cleave. If you're sainted by one block and demonized by the next, our channels will drown. Alani pictured a porcelain cup in an old kitchen, steam ribboning up from tea poured to the lip. She pictured hands, lined and raw, holding the heat without flinching. "We don't control the choir," she said. "We control the hymn." Veronica almost smiled. "On the motion," she said, voice returning to chair cadence, "to ratify termination for cause per council's recommendation, authorize management to seek TROs and standstills as needed, authorize capital redeployment to the Grandma Rose Fund under a separate governance structure, and instruct communications to confine all statements to approved copy. All in favor." Hands rose in tiles, some immediately, some after a beat required to count a price. "Opposed?" Veronica asked. "Because ritual keeps the world straight." No hands moved. A director who loved abstentions almost raised one, and then let it fall. Motion carries. Relief didn't enter the room. Clarity did. Alani watched the rectangles turn from debate to execution. In the window, snow found new angles on glass. The Treasury man cleared his throat. "One more thing. Threat matrix for personal security. I've seen this movie. It never ends at the credits." Sabrina nodded. "We'll coordinate with Protect digital footprint audits tonight. Home address scrub requests already filed. Council will front any private security expansion authorized by the chair." "I authorize it," Veronica said without looking down. "Alani, my neighbors like their sleep." Alani said, "We'll be quiet." A private chat window pinged open from the energy baron. "Proud to vote yes. Call if you need a voice with gravel." She sent back a single full stop. He would understand. David slid into broader council mode. "Expect settlement offers within 48 hours. Disguised as apologies with escrow. We smile, say we appreciate the outreach, and decline. The only negotiations worth a breath are the ones that protect workers and clean assets. Decline with grace," Veronica said, "and document with precision." Another notification edged in. "Tro signed." David's mouth ticked relief. "Not gloating. Judge Singh granted preservation order on controlled encumbrances through hearing." He footnoted the conduct Mac. "I'll frame it for the press as the court recognized our contractual rights. Period." "Good," Veronica said. "We've bought time to be humane." The logistics matriarch's voice turned softer. "Alani, are you all right?" It wasn't performative. She had loaded trucks at 4 in February and knew the taste of wind. Alani considered the honest answer. In the quiet behind her sternum there was a heat that felt older than the company, older than the city's tallest buildings, the heat of a stove left on low in a winter kitchen, the kind that keeps a house intact. "I'm angry," she said, "in a way that makes me careful, and I'm steady." "That will do," Veronica said. The chair's face softened by a millimeter. "We'll reconvene at 10. Between now and then, rest if you can. If you can't, pretend." It fools the body long enough to write the next memo. Tiles blinked out one by one, boards vanishing back into their private architectures. Sabrina stayed. David stayed. Veronica lingered until she was the last square besides them. "Alani," Veronica said, alone now, her voice taking off its chairmanship and keeping its authority. "Leaders borrow courage from the future they intend to build. Tonight, borrow mine." "Thank you," Alani said. The words had weight. She let them. Veronica's tile winked dark. Sabrina's office light flickered as someone in a hallway hit a switch with the flat of a hand and then thought better of it. "We'll be back in court tomorrow," Sabrina said. "I'll send you copies of the filings. No need to read tonight." "I'll read," Alani said. "Send anyway." David gathered his notes into stacks, like he was tucking children in. "Sleep is a contract. Ms. Washington, consider performance." He cut his connection. The room returned to its own air. Marble, fin paper, the distant breath of the building's lungs. Alani opened the folder labeled GRF draft. The first page was a sketch more than a plan. Mandate, scope, governance, initial tranches, metrics that measured not gloss but grit, jobs preserved, leases signed with fair term, invoices paid within 30 days, survival of winter rates. She wrote 3 words in the margin. First, checks out. The conference room felt like a theater after a matinee warm, emptied of the loudest audience, still humming with a story that would run again. She poured water from a carafe into a thin glass and held it until the cold found her fingers. The glass reflected her face in miniature. For a moment it resembled the porcelain cup from memory, cheap, white, perfect enough to become sacred if a pair of steady hands insisted. Her phone vibrated once. A text from an unknown number. Saw what you did. Thank you. No surname, no presumption. She didn't reply. Some thanks belong to the air. Snow feathered the sill. In some other part of the city, a judge put his pen away. In another, printers cooled their rollers. Somewhere else, someone who had laughed earlier sat in an empty room and heard, at last, the shape of that laugh. Alani capped her pen. She stood, not with ceremony, simply to change the temperature of her own bone. She shut the lights with a fingertip, left the chandelier to the dark, and walked out into a corridor that smelled faintly of paint and lemon. The building's night crew moved in practiced silence. Custodial carts, rolling like small ships. One of them glanced up, and she nodded. The nod was return. Equal. Sufficient. Outside, winter pressed its palm to the glass. Inside, paper cooled. Tomorrow would be loud. Tonight, the city gave her 10 quiet steps to the elevator, and she took them, each placing itself on the marble, with a certainty that didn't ask for permission. Morning came in footage. Clips from a dozen angles marched across screens like a chorus line. The stained silk, the circle of bright faces, the moment a metal card turned a room into a court. Anchors arranged their eyebrows for outrage. Commentators spoke as if they'd been there. A lower third crawled in quick capital letters that made nuance look lazy. The same 8 seconds looped until the loop felt like law. Hashtags acquired gravity. Red on marble braided with claws. 1, 2.1. A columnist wrote, "Human dignity is not a variable cost," and meant it. A radio man said, "If this were a script, you'd call it unbelievable," and didn't mean that. On the 43rd floor, Alani watched the city make day out of weather. The lake was iron. The sky, a pane held at a cold angle. Her office kept its heat, the way her grandmother had taught kitchens to keep warmth low and steady. The night's filings stacked on her desk like a regiment at ease. No confit, no champagne, just paper, still breathing ink. A meeting invite ticked across her screen, and then politely sat down. She ignored it for 10 more seconds and set her coffee on the coaster. A server had wordlessly handed her last night before the room's axis moved. She didn't trust the smell of coffee this morning. It reminded her too much of closing arguments. She sipped anyway. Bitterness behaved. That would have to count as mercy. David called. 3 networks outside want you live, he said. 2 papers want the cover. 1 podcast says they can do nuance. No adjectives, she answered. You expected I'd forgotten? I expected the world might have. A soft knock. Sabrina slid in with a folder that had been lived with. Judge Singh's signature hard copy, she said, setting the TRO on the desk like a steadying hand. Preservation order runs 10 days. Hearing set. I spoke with Van Craftoft Council. They're still in their funhouse mirror phase. Misunderstood. Misquoted. Miss everything. They'll come around to mistaken when Discovery starts spelling. Workers. Alani asked. We've pushed notices to suppliers and staff on tied assets. Wage protected. Continuity plans in motion. Procurement stands up the hotline in an hour. HR already has a script that sounds like a person wrote it. And the fund, your draft's good. I have 2 names for an independent chair who believe in teeth. Community board seats lined up. Credit union partnerships are willing. They've been waiting for someone to sit on their side of the table. A buzz from Alani's second phone. Personal. The way an old song is personal. Unknown. We have receipts. Then a photo, a copy of the door memo. Creased and coffee-ringed, photographed on a locker room bench. A second text. They'll ask us to clean it up. We won't. Initials. G. Greg. Sabrina read over her shoulder. Not surprised. She knew. We'll route him to Whistle. Council will keep him out of the grinder as best we can. Keep his job secured if he wants it. Alani said. If he doesn't, we'll place him somewhere better. Either way, make sure he sleeps tonight. Sabrina nodded. We can't fix a century, but we can fix a shift. On a different floor, in a different kind of morning, a family watched screens as if they were under anesthesia. Harrison had not slept. The whiskey in the water glass no longer negotiated. Eleanor's pearls, faithful soldiers, looked heavier than they had at midnight. Blair refreshed her feeds and found the algorithm had learned a new lesson. Her face attached to a woman on the floor drew more engagement than her face attached to a dress. Carter raged at a rectangle that reflected him too honestly, typing the word reverse into a sentence where it didn't fit. At the end of the long dining table, the in-house counsel, Owen Pierce, stared at the stack of notices. The way you stare at the transcript of a confession that is technically voluntary, we could argue ambiguity in the clause, he said, not believing it. We could plead disproportion. There's a venue somewhere willing to. We pay them, Harrison snapped. You pay everyone, Owen replied, evenly, as if tone could rope panic and lead it back to the barn. The question is whether a judge will let you. He rubbed his temple with 2 fingers and met Eleanor's eyes. There is another question. Who in this room wants to lie under oath about last night? Silence didn't do them any favors. It let the air reframe them as objects in a museum, a dynasty arranged under glass. In the service corridor, Greg sat on an overturned plastic bin and reread the memo he had photographed. The way survivors rehearse instruction, his supervisor had placed a hand on his shoulder an hour ago and said, not unkindly, we've got to standardize the log. Clean it. You know how it is. Greg did know how it is, how it has always been, how his grandfather's stories about the factory gate had sounded familiar even in a century with apps. He typed Whistle into a browser, found the portal, and uploaded the image. Then he wrapped his coat around a thermos, poured coffee over the idea of not my business, and drank. At an incubator on the west side, a woman named Tanika scanned a thread about the Grandma Rose Fund and exhaled a noise that was not a laugh and not a sob. Her shop's invoices had been sitting in limbo with a Van Craftoft-owned landlord who treated Net 30 as a suggestion. She messaged her 3-person staff, if this is real, we make it to spring. One sent back a gif of a sprout breaking concrete. The second sent, is it really named for a grandma? Tanika tipped. Yeah, mine would have loved that. She didn't add that her grandma used to say, even concrete was wet once. You can make a mark if you press hard enough. Alani put on her coat. I'm going to the incubator, she told Sabrina. You could do it by Zoom. I could do a lot of things by Zoom. Alani said, I want their rooms to see a person. Sabrina didn't argue. Protective is in the lobby, she said. We'll keep the route quiet. Outside, cameras had learned her door. Security shaped space around her with the economy of people whose job is to draw invisible lines. A man with a microphone lunged and remembered he didn't want to be that man. A woman called her by her first name and stopped when her own voice sounded like a theft. Alani kept moving. Snow worried the cuffs of her trousers and then gave up. The incubator sat in a building that had been a warehouse when warehouses were loud, and then had been a storage space when warehouse meant forgotten, and now was a place where ideas tried to turn into rent. Heat rattled the pipes like the building reciting its bones. The director, a woman with hair in a scarf patterned like a map, met her with a hug she didn't pretend not to need. "We've got 7 founders on life support," the director said, "another 5 with product ready, and no line of credit because they're fresh, and the banks want salt. We keep telling them to hold the line. Lines are expensive. They'll be cheaper by Friday." Alani replied, "Our guarantees will make their paper worth the ink." A boy, no taller than the copy machine, looked up from a 3D printer and said, "Are you the lady from the TV?" He didn't ask it with awe, just curiosity, like a scientist testing a hypothesis. Alani crouched to meet his question where it lived. "I am a lady who was on the TV," she said. "What are you making?" "Ahinga," he said. He held up a piece of plastic pale as winter. "The door at my grandma's sticks. Doors should open," Alani said. "Keep at it." Back downtown, Van Craftoft Enterprises tried to pretend it had a morning routine. Phones did not avail themselves of the pretense. Bankers called to move covenants from the polite reminder column to the "we noticed" column. A private equity fund that had grinned around a table with Harrison last quarter stopped grinning long enough to send a letter expressing concern over recent governance headlines and to request a call to review alternative outcomes. In the language of capital, that was a shovel being handed to a man in a hole. Blair's agent texted, "We can spin this. Redemption arc. Philanthropy pivot." Blair stared at her screen and felt, for the first time in a long time, the sensation of a floor not obeying her weight. She put on sunglasses in her own kitchen, and then took them off. She deleted her last 4 posts, and watched the deletions not save her. Carter went live. He used the word "witch hunt" and the phrase "cancel culture," and then said "reverse racism" like a man pronouncing a spell. The comments did what comments do, pour gasoline, threw water, counted viewers. Owen watched from a hallway and mentally composed a memo titled, "On the advisability of not broadcasting your own deposition." In a strip mall 6 blocks from the incubator, a Van Craftoft property manager named Hector studied his paycheck and the notice about potential changes in ownership and felt the old hollow open behind his sternum where rent fear lives. The hotline number on the notice promised continuity. He had learned the shapes of promises. He dialed anyway. A voice answered that did not sound like a script. He wrote 3 numbers on the back of his hand, and then his rent looked marginally less like a cliff and more like a hill. Back at Apex, communications arrived with mock-ups. "It's tasteful," one ventured, sliding a draft across the desk, a photo of a grandmother's hands wrapped around a teacup. Headline, "The Grandma Rose Fund. Capital with memory. We stayed away from triumph. We leaned into continuity. Lose the hands." Alani said, "To literal." She tapped the headline, "And the word memory will be bait. Replace it with discipline." "I bury. Discipline is cold," a junior said, then blushed for having said it aloud. "Discipline keeps people paid," Alani replied. "Warmth without discipline is a candle in the wind." Her phone thrummed in that particular way. Doxing makes it thrum fast. Arrhythmic, a drum line running downhill. The security app threw a banner, personal info circulating on fringe forums. An attached screenshot showed her brownstone's outline from a map site, a thread below it promising to visit. The building address wasn't visible in the window, but her spine felt it anyway. Sabrina's eyes sharpened. "We escalate to protective detail at home," she said. "Stagger routes. We'll get the platform to suppress. I'll call the U.S. Attorney's liaison if threats cross the line. Neighbors." Alani asked. "Patrol will sweep. We'll keep it quiet. You didn't move to a fortress. We'll make the neighborhood one." Alani looked at the cup on her desk and imagined, for a moment, the porcelain one balanced under her grandmother's thumb. "The cup is hot," Grandma would say, "and you have to hold it anyway. If you drop it, you clean the pieces. If you keep it, you drink and you pass it on." There had never been a clause number on that lesson. It had still been binding. Her assistant hovered at the door, a sheet in hand. "Numbers," he said. "Market open down 3%. We're off 1.5. Better than peers." The analyst note that matters read, "Governance, spine." The phrase is catching. "Some phrases are worth trending," she said. A text from Veronica landed. "Cable hit at noon if you want it. I will take it instead." Alani typed, "Take it. Tell them we're boring. Veronica, my specialty." In the afternoon gray, a protest gathered, half genuine, half opportunist, all noise. A line of hand-drawn signs walked in circles outside the building. "No to cancel culture" in strokes of anger. "Dignity clause is real" in careful letters. "Pay your staff on time" on cardboard from a liquor store box. Security stood in the posture of men who know which way a crowd might tilt and plan to keep the tilt from turning into gravity. Alani met Tanika again under a catenary of hanging bulbs. The incubator had strung to make the space feel like evening in a park. "We'll need procurement maps," Tanika said. "If your companies buy our things, we're not just alive, we're moving." "You'll have them," Alani said. "Demand is the only poetry balance sheets respect." She headed back as winter rehearsed its encore. The car slid through traffic made of thoughts people hadn't finished thinking. Her driver said nothing and said it professionally. At a light, a boy in a puffy jacket made a snowball and didn't throw it. He looked at the car's window and saw his face in it, and liked that less than he expected. The brownstone waited with its ribs, showing brick like knuckles, windows like eyes that forgive. Protective had posted a quiet geometry on the block, a sedan too ordinary to notice, a pair of men with dog-walker posture and cop shoes. The stoop had been swept by someone who cared about entrances. She climbed. Halfway up, a neighbor across the street lifted a hand and gave the small, universal salute of city solidarity. "We see, we don't say, we keep watch." She returned it. Inside, she set her clutch down and drew the curtains a quarter way. The compromise between fortress and fishbowl. She stood in the middle of the room and let the silence thicken until it was not empty but supportive. She picked up the porcelain cup from the shelf where it lived in this century, cheap, white, priceless. She filled it with tea that tasted like old advice. Her phone face down hummed once, the subdued purr reserved for one contact. She didn't look. She knew the message would read what it always read. When the world came at a person with rope and rumor, "We're here," it would be signed simply V. Outside, a snowplow made the slow progress of machines that save cities by refusing speed. In the alley, a bottle broke, and then someone laughed in a way that meant they were trying to bring the sound down. A thread online promised a visit that would not come tonight. That would be for later chapters, for courts and cameras and consequence. For now, she drank heat. The cup held, the house held, the city exhaled enough to make space for her breath. Up the block, a window lit in the shape of someone else's life. Down the block, a dog barked at Winter, and Winter ignored it. On the desk, the TRO lay flat, the judge's name a small signature in a corner. Alani put the cup down gently. The saucer made a clean, porcelain, click-one sound. Exact, as if a metronome had been set not for time but for discipline. She straightened the TRO with 2 fingers, then left it crooked. Some truths are better read at an angle. The building's heat ticked like a metronome in the vents. The kind of night that makes a city hold its shoulders higher had folded itself over the river, and the glass towers wore frost in thin, stubborn seams. In a corner office, 6 floors below the crest of a name on a facade, Owen Pierce read the same paragraph 3 times and watched it change into something that could be submitted as evidence. He had been the kind of lawyer who believed structure could save people from themselves, clauses as guardrails, covenants as speed bumps. Tonight, the words looked more like tire tracks across a median. A spreadsheet glowed on his second monitor, a scaffold of debt, senior, mezz, predatory, untitled. Side letters winked in a folder named innocently enough to be reckless. One document, emergency liquidity proposal, was annotated with the kind of optimism men use when they are too close to the edge to see the drop. At the bottom of that draft, Harrison's signature leaned forward as if trying to leave the page. Owen rubbed the bridge of his nose. He had told himself for years that being the adult at the table mattered, that if he kept the worst impulses inside the building, he could file them down into something the world wouldn't bleed on. His wife had once said, quietly, that sandpaper used long enough becomes the wood. He looked at his hands and wondered when the grit had moved under his skin. His phone vibrated face down. On the lock screen, a message previewed from a banker too friendly for this hour. We need comfort. Another from a junior analyst, panic disguised as punctuation. Are we still solvent? A third from Carter, because the universe prefers irony. Draft me a statement about free speech that makes me look smart. He stood and crossed to the window. Winter pressed its forehead to the glass. The river below moved like a decision being reconsidered. He remembered his first year out of law school, a Saturday clinic, a woman with a paper sack of receipts, and a landlord promising eviction, and a judge who asked for nouns and dates, and then mercifully believed her. He had slept better that night than any since. The printer coughed. He pulled 2 documents from the tray, the internal memo on exclusivity positioning at the door, and a schedule of last-minute encumbrance relocations assets, proposed to be retitled into a family trust whose name sounded like a retreat center and functioned like a hole. The relocations were dated for Monday. Monday was a problem. Monday was a crime if you called it by its name. He placed both pages in a manila envelope and wrote Privilege Review Draft on the tab, because even conscience needs a label that looks boring while it learns to breathe. His office door clicked. Eleanor stepped in without knocking. Pirl subdued, mouth a flat line that once knew how to bend into an advantage. We are not surrendering, she said. Draft the statements. Shift the equities. Move what must be moved. Mrs. Vancraftoft, he said, with the careful evenness of a man bending a wire that will remember every curve. Moving assets under a preservation order is not a shift. It's a felony. Her eyes flashed the heat of a burner left on. Then draft me a world where it isn't. The law doesn't let me do that, he said. I am your lawyer. I am also an officer of the court. She stepped closer, the floral note of a perfume that had never had to apologize hovering between them. We have given you a career, she said. We have given you our name to steady your own. He thought of a different name on a courthouse door, his own. Once, when the clinic let him scrawl it on a pleading for a woman who spelled relief with 2 F's and a T. He thought of his wife's text from an hour ago. Come home or come clean. He did not answer either woman. He watched his breath fog the window and wished it were summer. When breath disappears quickly enough to lie to you, draft the lawful options, he said, all of them, and tell Harrison to stop letting his son broadcast deposition. He carried the envelope to the elevator like a man delivering a small organ on ice. The lobby was a cathedral for money at this hour. The marble looked relieved to be empty. Outside, the frost made every streetlight hum. She chose a bench that didn't look like it was trying to be a bench. Sabrina Cole liked municipal parks at night. They reminded her of legal doctrine plain, public, designed to hold weight. She wore a dark coat that defied adjectives, and the patient look of a woman who has won more cases than she has talked about. Owen sat at the far end, as if they were strangers in a play. He set the envelope between them, its secrecy pretending to be subtle. This conversation doesn't happen, he said. It doesn't, Sabrina agreed. He outlined the relocation. He outlined the memo. He outlined a pattern, promises made with other people's wages as collateral. He didn't absolve himself. He didn't perform contrition. He presented facts in the order a judge would prefer. Why me? She asked. It was not quite a challenge. Because you won't ruin the people who had no say, he said. Because you will ruin the men who did. She watched his face the way one reads a precedent, looking for where it bends and where it holds. Protective filings go in the morning, she said. We'll add this. We will keep employees whole wherever paper gives us a lane. I'll route you to the AG's proffer line. Bring this there, under their umbrellas. I am not yours to confess to. I'm not confessing, he said. I'm hinging. The word sat between them, small and exact. She thought of the boy with the 3D printed hinge at the incubator plastic, pale as winter. A door. Learning to obey a different hand. You understand this may end your career. He exhaled like the first door opening in a house closed too long. Then let it end, he said, surprised at his own relief. It wasn't the career I wanted to have. A siren negotiated the avenue. Irritated. Resigned. Somewhere. Tires hissed over salted asphalt. The envelope weighed little. It contained more gravity than most buildings. Go home, Sabrina said, softer than she meant to. Go be the man you meant. He left without looking back. Because some exits require that. She pocketed the envelope without ceremony. The paper warmed under her coat the way a good argument warms a courtroom. The house smelled like lemon oil and coal. Alani laid 2 folders on the dining table. Procurement maps and fun. Board candidates. And resisted the domestic impulse to set a place. The window reflected her. Then let winter replace hair. A text chimed. Veronica Cable hit done. I said we're boring. Alani smiled without her mouth catching up. Hair door camera pinged. Protective had strict rules about unplanned arrivals. The small green C through showed them earning their paycheck. A woman in a wool hat stood on the stoop, hands empty, face set to a determination that made the cold bunch its shoulders. Alani went to the door before she understood she had already decided to open it. The woman introduced herself without conceding apology for the hour. My name is Ruthie Mercado, she said. I'm head of housekeeping at the penthouse. The consonants were clear, the vowels held long, the backstory bigger than the sentence. We have a union. A small one, but we have it. They told us today not to come back. No severance. No, nothing. Alani stepped aside because doorways should not litigate in winter. Ruthie removed her hat and squeezed melt out of the wool with both hands, as if wringing a thought dry. I don't want pity, she said, reading the room, and refusing the wrong script. I want a map. Someone told me you draw them. Alani gestured at the table. Sit. Tell me what you need. Ruthie didn't sit immediately. She walked to the window and looked out at a block of city that had learned how to keep heat. There are 12 of us regular, 8 events. Some with papers that fit lines. Some with papers that fit hand. We don't want their name. We want our jobs under a good one. Or we want enough time to make a bridge. You'll have both. Alani said. It was not bravado. It was an offer backed by papers still drying. We're acquiring their vendor contracts where they're clean. We'll novate and preserve wages. Where they're not, we'll contract you direct. If you want to spin out as your own shop, the fund will capitalize your trucks, your machines, your insurance. You'll bid our buildings. On time, 30 days, nonnet never. Ruthie took the hat in both hands and set it on the table like a temporary flag. You talk like someone has tried to cheat you, she said. Someone has, Alani replied. They lost. Ruthie nodded once, as if awarding a point in a quiet game. She reached into her coat and placed a folded sheet next to the folders. A roster of names, hours penciled in the margins, phone numbers that belonged to women who made numbers obey. First orientation is Saturday, Alani said, already flipping the page, already circling a column. At the incubator on Homan, bring whoever wants the map. Ruthie paused in the doorway when she left. They treated you like they treat us, she said. They just made it louder. Alani met her eyes. Then we will answer in a voice they can't ignore. Far from lemon oil and maps, Carter made a mistake with teeth. He posted a clip. It showed a street sign too long, a camera pan too wide. It showed a stoop that people who loved that stoop would recognize. The caption was performative courage. If she thinks she's safe, think again. He waggled his eyebrows into a punchline. The internet did the rest. Within minutes, screenshots traveled faster than contrition. Protective escalated. A cruiser idled at the corner, low profile as a siren can be. A man on a message board posted a route. Another posted a plan. A third posted a line he wouldn't cross until he did. Owen saw the clip and felt his stomach turn to an honest, prehistoric stone. He dialed a number he had not meant to dial. Harrison answered with, "What now?" "Take your son's phone," Owen said. "If you love him at all, take it. He is manufacturing a felony in public." "You work for me," Harrison said. "You do not talk to me like." "I work for the law," Owen said, and surprised them both. He hung up and packed a bag with clothes that did not impress anyone. He placed his bar card on the dresser, looked at it, put it back in his wallet. The hinge had turned. There were still doors to push. The Attorney General's office was lit like a dorm at exam week caffeine. Tired jokes. Sabrina walked the envelope through 2 metal detectors that asked nothing personal, and into a room where a young lawyer in a suit that had learned to fit too quickly took custody like a priest. Paper changed hands. Chain of custody recorded the handoff with the same devotion a monastery keeps to names. "Anonymous if we can manage it," Sabrina said. "We can manage a lot," the young lawyer said. "We can't manage time. You've given us hours. We'll spend them well." She stepped back into a night that smelled like a crosswalk salt, cold metal, exhaust, something almost like hope. "If you let it sit on your tongue," her phone hummed. Protective. Threats escalated. Block tight. She typed back. Hold. She didn't add, "Don't be theatrical." She didn't have to. They were professionals. Alani's kettle sang. The song sounded like a test signal on a radio from a different century. She poured water over tea and watched the steam write careful cursive at the lip. The porcelain cup knew its job and performed. Her phone lit with a text from a number she had saved under an initial, because not all names deserve the same light. You made enemy look small. They will try to look big. Be careful. V. She set the phone face down and carried the cup to the window. Snow revised the street. A dog rewrote a corner. In the glass, she saw a woman and a city, and the slice of a story where a hinge learns it can hold a door. Across town, in a house that smelled like money's memory, Eleanor stared at a safe she could open and couldn't fill. She placed a bracelet inside, because it looked like wealth on a wrist and like a concession in a box. Harrison pasted a line into a rug that had been woven by hands that never saw the room it would live in. Carter scrolled the comments on his own threat and smiled at the worst ones. Ignorance. Clapping for ignorance. In a warehouse that had become an incubator that was becoming a map, a boy tested his 3D printed hinge on a cabinet door. It resisted, then complied with a small, perfect click. He looked up at his grandmother, who had come down the hall because she trusts sounds more than text. "It works," he said. "It should," she replied, touching the hinge like blessing. "You measured twice." The city inhaled against the cold. Somewhere, a judge highlighted a line and wrote a note in the margin, "Fraudulent conveyance." Somewhere else, a woman folded a roster and put it in her pocket like a weapon. On a park bench, a lawyer sat for a minute longer than his schedule allowed and told himself that a hinge is a simple thing until it matters more than the door. Winter pressed its palm to the glass and waited to see which way the city would open. The street was a throat clearing. Slogans arrived on cardboard and in mouths, some practiced, some borrowed. A thin drumline stitched rhythm into cold air. Someone with a bullhorn tried to make volume pass for argument. Protective drew an invisible geometry around the brownstone posture, casual, eyes doing math. Snow flurried like static over a broadcast. Inside, Alani stacked papers she didn't need to carry but couldn't leave behind. The TRO, the fun term sheet, a roster with Ruthie's neat columns. The kettle hissed. She reached for the porcelain cup on the shelf. Warmth, discipline, pour, breathe. The door camera flashed green. An officer's outline filled the stoop. Hat cupped to keep the weather off his voice. "Ma'am," he said into the intercom, "we're tightening the block. Your name is trending in the wrong places with the wrong verbs." She opened to the chain. The cold pressed forward like a fact. "Define wrong." "Addresses." "Roots." "Hired muscle who think forum posts are contracts," he said. "We've already peeled off a couple who came to take selfies with a crime." A sound split from the crowd, sharp, specific. A bottle broke in argument with a lamppost. The bullhorn answered with a chant that didn't scan and didn't need to. Cameras swiveled like flowers that eat light. "Sabrina cold. We've got a warrant on the relocations. AG's office hits their server room in 30. Telegraphed it to no one. Also, your stoop is becoming a set. Do you want to be the scene?" "I want to be a door that opens the right way," Alani said. "Then we're moving you." Sabrina replied. "No theater. We do this like a filing. Clean. Quiet. On time." A bang traveled into the bones of the row houses. It wasn't the sound the body expects after a warning. It was smaller, the wooden thud of something against a door, not hers. A neighbor shouted a correction in the vernacular of a block that polices itself before the city does. The chant faltered, then reassembled itself with more consonants. Alani put the cup down to fetch a coat. The saucer rocked, made that shy porcelain ring, steadied. A small grace, almost comic in the hour, how a thing that breaks easily promises not to. She added gloves to the pocket she never used, and slid the files into a bag, made for boardrooms and back seats. The thermostat clicked like a metronome trying to be brave. "Rear alley," the officer said. "We feed you to the sedan 2 doors down." 10 seconds exposed. will do the counting. She took one last turn through the room because leaving is a kind of inventory. Books squared their shoulders. The rug remembered feet that don't come home anymore. The photo on the mantel, a kitchen, a woman, a teacup watched without judging. She unlocked the chain. At the threshold, a chant found a name and swung it like a rope. Her name, the crowd tried to yank something by it. She thought of the hinge in the boy's hand at the incubator. Plastic fighting resistance. Until the angles learned patience, she checked her own angles. Ready? It was as quick as practice. Protective opened the back gate. Cold wrapped itself around lungs and waited to be refused. The alley smelled like old metal and stubborn salt. The sedan idled low. The men in it dressed to be mistaken for dog walkers, contractors, men who know the block better than the men yelling on it. That was when the glass upstairs broke. It was a petty sound, more temper than plan. A hand-sized rock arguing with a pane. The rock lost. The glass lost more. The sound was less the shatter itself than the room gasping around it. Protective pivoted, shoulders tightening for the kind of noise that follows. There wasn't one, just a cheer that died as soon as it realized it had nothing to cheer for. Alan didn't look back. A hinge knows when to move. They slid her into the sedan. The door shut with that car's precise thump. The driver's hands were good at not shaking. The convoy peeled, deliberate. No siren, no claim on the city's attention. A man with a sign ran after them for 3 steps and remembered his shoes were wrong for running. The building's windows reflected a scene that looked less like a protest than like a mood. Traffic took them the long way. The city's arteries were clogged with opinions. The driver chose capillaries. On a corner, a deli put up a handwritten sign, "No politics at the counter." Inside, a woman handed a sandwich to a man who looked surprised to be hungry. The city continued its other emergencies. Sabrina rerouted mid-ride. "Not the corporate apartment," she said. "Reporters have already turned its entrance into a confessional. We're using the judge's chamber's annex we arranged with the clerk. You'll like the light. It tells the truth." The sedan nosed into an underground slot under a courthouse that had been poured with federal confidence and local patience. The annex was 3 flights up, across a corridor that smelled faintly of books and formaldehyde, like a university that had learned to sue. The clerk, a woman with a cardigan heavy enough to be a shield, left her desk to unlock a door with a key that looked more story than metal. "Haven't had this many night filings since the last time someone declared moral panic by press release," she said, and gestured them inside. The room held a conference table and a window that cut the sky into a sensible rectangle. Alani set the cup and the files on the table and took the seat with the sight line to both door and glass. Sabrina slid the manila envelope from last night across the wood, as if returning a wallet. "AG is in motion," she said. Van Craftoft Council filed a statement that uses the word misconstrued 3 times. It reads like a dry cleaner's receipt for a reputation that won't come back. Her phone buzzed. A message from Veronica. Cable hit landed. "You owe me an interview on municipal bonds as a treat." A second from the logistics matriarch. 6 trucks pledged to your fund's first cohort. No credit checks that punish hunger. A third from Tanika. A photo, her staff in their shop. Hands up, not in victory, but in attendance. Under it, "We're ready." Alani answered the first with a thank you shaped like a period. The second with send routes. The third with Saturday. 9 a.m. Bring ein voice. Then she put both phones face down and folded her hands to remind herself that the body is an instrument too. Across town, the warrant knocked on a door that obeyed the badge faster than it had obeyed anyone else in months. Agents moved like competence, taught them choreography. The server room disgorged heat and noise. An analyst clapped a static strap to his wrist and began to image drives with the devotion of a monk copying manuscripts. Paper that had hidden in optical illusions gave up its chemistry. Dates, side letters, the Monday relocations with their euphemistic file names: Sunset Plan, Harbor, Trellis. Harrison tried to argue with jurisdiction, then tried to argue with math. Neither gave ground. Owen stood at the edge like a man who had decided which side of the room the future would be on, and didn't need to be seen crossing to it. Eleanor found a camera with her instincts, and found it had no interest in portraits today. The unsecured piece of this saga, Carter found his own doorbell ringing. Officers stood on his stoop with the kind of patience that means the law isn't in a mood to be refused. He opened with a grin that imagined content and met a warrant instead. The phone he had live-streamed from lay on a counter, smirking. An officer bagged it with ceremony. Harassment, doxing, incitement, someone said, without adjectives. His smile attempted to survive and failed. Back at the annex, the cup on the table felt heavier than it should. Maybe it was the room's gravity. Maybe it was the body's. Alani wrapped both palms around it and found calm, where she always found it in the exactness of heat translating to bone. The door opened without surprise. Protective's rhythm preceded the knock. A young officer, 26, tired, eyes good at corners, stepped in with a careful urgency. "We retrieved your house," he said, and immediately corrected himself. "Flushing," meaning, "we secured it. There's minor damage, a pain in the stairwell, and, ma'am, I'm sorry." A shelf came down. "What was on it?" she asked, though her breath had already told her. "Cups," he said, then saw the one on the table and realized the word's insufficiency. A cup. Sabrina looked at Alani. Something passed between them that understood objects, the way the world keeps score in private, the way a thing your grandmother held is not a thing at all, but a chapter. "It's just porcelain," Alani said, shaping the sentence to hold more weight than it could with grammar alone. "I can fix the glass tomorrow." The officer added, contrition making him younger. "I can't fix," he stopped. "Thank you," Alani said. "For the glass, the cup did its work." He nodded once. A soldier recognizing a ritual and left to stand in a hallway and become part of the building again. Sabrina exhaled through her nose. "Sacrifices are never the ones we budgeted," she said. Alani touched the rim of the cup with her thumb. "Half a blessing, half a measurement. It taught me a thing. That's all it owed." Her phone lit with an unknown number. She let it ring twice. Answered. A voice she knew by inclination, not by acquaintance, came low and clear. "This is Special Counsel Morales. With the Attorney General," the voice said. "We are in receipt of materials from your counsel. We will move on the relocations. We will protect employees wherever the paper gives us teeth. One request. Hold your public powder. Let us file first." "I like filing," Alani said. "They keep people honest." "Honesty," Morales replied, with the weary humor of a public servant who has seen its scarcity, "is a project. We have a team." She ended the call and watched the window take on the gray particular to late winter mornings that never fulfill the promise of bright. She thought of Ruthie's roster in her bag, Tanika's photo, the boy's hinge, the officer's apology. She thought of Eleanor's pearls, and how heavy jewelry gets when it must apologize for a throat. The annex's radiator clicked like a clock with its own agenda. Outside, the courthouse steps hosted a different congregation, reporters with cables of their own, men who read warrants the way other men read horoscopes, a woman giving directions with the authority of a person who controls rooms without owning them. Inside, the light changed by a fraction and made everything honest by accident. Sabrina lowered into the chair opposite and unrolled a blueprint. Procurement channels redrawn overnight: who buys, where it lands, which docks, which forklifts. We push this to logistics at noon, she said. By Monday, Ruthie signs her first direct contract, or I retire from law and take up carpentry. Don't, Alani said. The world needs you to keep nouns behaving. Then, quieter, but keep a hammer. They worked. Numbers became routes. Names became lanes. Net 30 became a promise written with ink that remembers when the room slowed, the kind of quiet that follows good work. Settled, earned, not purchased. Protective repositioned at the annex door. The drumline on the street found a new rhythm and bored itself. A cable anchor signaled to a camera, performed empathy into a lens, and cut to a commercial for pills that promise sleep. Near noon, the clerk peered in, eyebrows up in fellowship. You'll want the courtroom feed, she said. Judge is taking the AG's motion, audio only, because decorum. She clicked a speaker to life, and the magic trick of civilization happened. Disembodivoise. Words arranged into order. A man in a robe making time obey statute. On the Attorney General's emergency motion, the judge said, unhurried. The court grants preservation and enjoins transfers identified in Exhibits A through D. Counsel. No adjectives in your press avail. The clerk smiled like a teacher hearing a student use a hard word correctly. Sabrina grinned, despite herself. Alani's shoulders dropped half an inch. The body-keeping score of battles that don't look like it on paper. Her phone hummed once more. A text from Ruthie. Unsentimental. Saturday. We'll bring bread. Another from the logistics matriarch. Drivers ask if cookies count as compliance. Alani typed, always. She lifted the cup one last time before the afternoon devoured the room. Heat translated into hands again. The oldest contract honored. Out in the city, glass was swept. Warrants were logged. Servers cooled. Protesters got cold and went home. In a warehouse on the west side, a hinge opened and stayed open because someone had measured twice and cut once, and refused to accept that doors only swing one way. Back at the brownstone, a broom paused in a stairwell and waited for orders. A neighbor in slippers gathered a shard of porcelain in a dish towel and placed it on the sill like an exhibit. He did not know whose it was. He knew it mattered. The city, satisfied for a moment with its own equilibrium, pressed winter's palm to every pane and asked, without malice, what each house had chosen to keep. Saturday brought a sky the color of ruled paper. The city had graded itself overnight. Salt along the curbs, plows asleep after their exam, breath passing like citations in cold air. The incubator on Homan woke early and hummed radiators clanking their approval. Coffee doing small miracles. Fluorescent lights deciding to be kind. Tables were pushed together until they looked like a runway. Clipboards waited at attention. Boxes of cookies from a bakery that insists on butter and dignity occupied the far end like a morale unit. On a whiteboard, Grandma Rose Fund. Orientation contracts roots net 30. Underlined twice. Then again, when someone enjoyed the underline, Alani arrived without orchestration. Protective ghosted the corners and then pretended not to be there. The director handed her a marker. You said map, she said. We drew it. Tell us if the river's wrong. Ruthie walked in with her crew, 12 regulars. 3 event workers who had heard the rumor that rumors could sometimes be true. Their gloves were tucked into their hats, an efficiency that looks like a custom. They put their names on a sheet with the reverence of people accustomed to signing away, not signing toward. Tanika appeared with a folder of invoices, clipped square. Her staff followed, sleeves pushed to elbows. Eyes at that good. dangerous level, where attention becomes action. Logistics parked two trucks outside. A driver leaned against one door and looked like a letter Y in a manual about load balance. "We'll do this fast," Alani said. "Fast and right." She wrote routes and drew lines like stitches across neighborhoods that had learned too much about triage. "Your first contracts live here and here." She drew rectangles. "Ruthie, you own these 3 buildings at start by Monday noon. Custodial vendor of record flips to your shop through Novation. You'll see the ACH hit 30 days to the day." She looked up. 30 means 30. If we slip, we pay interest. A murmur moved through the room, a sound between permission and disbelief. "Tanika," Alani continued, "purchase orders go out today. You ship Monday. Logistics will cross-dock. We've set a window. Your invoices won't find purgatory. They'll find a desk with a pen. Trust." The logistics matriarch had texted last night. "Arrives in clipboards and cookies." She had delivered both. Drivers filed in with boxes and jokes, with soft edges, and a box of Tupperware cookies labeled "Compliance" in black marker. The boy, with the 3D printed hinge, stood on a chair to see over a stack of routers. He waved shyly. In his pocket, a pale piece of plastic waited for an assignment. The first contract signed with the quiet gravity of a marriage. Ruthie read each line like a skeptic who prefers to be proved wrong. When she reached the clause that made Net 30 behave like a law of nature, she tapped it twice with her finger. "This, not a poem," she said. "It better be a clock." "It is a clock," Alani said. "And a promise." Phones pinged with news that belonged to other rooms. The Attorney General's office had filed preserves and injunctions. A judge had appointed an examiner. Other words. Longer, grew teeth, fraudulent conveyance, contempt. A third ping. Arraignment held. A certain defendant instructed to remain offline, a condition that looked like a joke until a bailiff unamused it. Owen, in a suit that looked relieved to fit, sat in a witness room that had seen men lie, and men learn how not to. He told a clean version of the truth. He used dates and verbs with appropriate tenses. When he paused, he drank water in discreet sips and looked out at a hallway where his wife leaned against a wall, reading a paperback she hadn't looked up from in years. Her thumb kept a place. He finished. She lifted her eyes and smiled. The smallest possible smile that still means an absolution. Across town, in a townhouse that had watched more champagne spills than tears, Harrison signed a stack of papers with a pen someone had engraved for him when the surface of his life was smooth. He filed a petition that converted pride into a docket number. The bankruptcy clerk took it like a nurse takes blood, gently, efficiently, as if the operation had been normalized decades ago. Eleanor pulled a bracelet from her wrist and set it on a velvet square, and learned, finally, that certain stones are heavy because of who they expect to sit above. The morning in the incubator thickened with work. Contracts became copies. Copies became emails. Procurement maps turned into routes. Routes turned into legs. Legs turned into handshakes and keys. The driver with the Y posture looked at his manifest and said to no one in particular, "It's nice when paper and wheels agree." "Cookies," someone announced, "because grace needs vessels." The tray made the rounds. Drivers took 2 each because they were told to. Greg texted Alani a picture. His badge, new employer, new title, small raise. "Not the point," he added, kept the memo, gave the old one mine. "We're square." She sent a single checkmark back, a glyph the city had decided could carry the weight of good. At noon, the courtroom feed returned as audio familiar voices, cutting the world into squares, and asking order to respect itself. The judge managed patience efficiently. Counsel managed adjectives with discipline. The examiner asked for access. The court gave it. Self-inflicted. The judge said once, tiny editorial tucked into a sentence that otherwise obeyed. A rumor tried to enter the incubator, the kind that grows extra limbs online, and failed. People were busy. When the contracts were all signatures and the last cookie had lost its argument with a child, the room thinned. Ruthie adjusted her hat and looked toward the door. "We are going to buy new cart," she said, "ones that roll without singing bad song." "Send me the invoice," Alani said. Tanika slid her folder back into her bag and regarded her staff. Their faces wore the posture of a team that knows practice is the only reason game day ever looks like luck. "We'll make our noon window," she said. "Tell logistics not to be late." Then, with a grin that put streetlight into her eyes, "It'll be nice to have a customer that pays before the seasons change." The boy climbed down. He handed Alani the hinge, palm flat, offering not gift but proof. "I made an extra," he said, "for any door." She closed her fingers around the small thing and felt how something light can feel like ballast when it chose the right moment. Police tape glowed thinly against winter light outside a certain penthouse. Reporters read their lines without taking off their gloves. The family moved inside a frame. The world had stopped adjusting to flatter them. Harrison scanned a letter from a bank that had loved him last quarter and now loved itself more. He answered a call from a number that used to come with favors and found only silence at the other end. Eleanor filmed an apology into a lens and deleted it when the playback sounded like the old audio track speaking over the new one. Carter sat in a room without cameras and stared at the small rectangle on the table that wasn't allowed to be turned on. He wondered who he was when he wasn't broadcasting himself. Across the street, a teenager filmed the irony of a man addicted to record silenced by a court, then put the phone down because even irony gets cold. Owen walked out of a building whose architecture had been designed to make men feel smaller and decided to let the scale do its work. He took his wife's hand. She threaded her fingers into his dinner. She said, "I could cook." He offered. "You could," she said gently. "Let's be kind to the kitchen." They smiled, and that was that. The brownstone stairwell smelled of new glass. The contractor had swept with quiet ceremony. On the sill, someone had left a small dish towel parcel. Inside, a shard of white porcelain, edge dull, curve intact. A neighbor's note, "Found this near the landing. Might be yours. 3B," with a drawing of a tiny house that looked like a confession of wanting to be better at drawing. Alani picked up the shard. Gravity recognized it. Memory did the rest. Veronica called without prelude. We had a board call. The words "boring" and "discipline" made it into 3 headlines. I consider that a cultural victory. Also, a columnist wrote that contracts are the city's second language. I consider that a faith. Good, Alani said. How's your gravel? Still in the voice. A pause. How's your cup? Broken. Alani replied simply, "I'm sorry." Veronica said, "Me too." Alani said, "But it taught me." It did its job. She set the shard beside the hinge and understood that keeping pieces is not the same as holding on. One is a museum. The other is a future. At dusk, the fund's website went live without fanfare. A paragraph, a name, an address where checks would move with more purpose than poetry. The headline didn't shout "Capital with discipline." Under it, a line, "Some doors should open." No adjectives. Across the lake, the sky performed that trick it does in winter where the light looks like a decision. On the west side, A truck backed into a dock with the low, constant beeping of competence. In a warehouse that had been other things first, Ruthie wheeled a cart that rolled quietly and didn't complain. She hummed a song that came from a grandmother whose English had been nouns and verbs, and the occasional indestructible phrase, "Hold steady." The Attorney General gave a press avail in a suit that had learned not to glint. "This is not a morality play," Morales said, resisting the microphone's appetite. "It is a matter of statute and compliance. We will file the next motions on Monday. Questions in writing. No adjectives." Reporters groaned, grateful. A city prefers its officials to sound like officials when the weather is complicated. Back at the incubator, lights clicked to save a bill. The director locked the door and looked once through the glass at a room that had held a different kind of court. She saw stacks of contracts, a plate with one last cookie, a whiteboard erased to a ghost of maps. In the reflection, she saw a city she loved, not because it was gentle, but because it insisted you build. Later, in the brownstone, Alani sat with the shard and the hinge in her palm. The house breathed the way houses do when the temperature drops, and wood remembers forests. She thought of the judge's voice, Ruthie's hut, Owen's envelope, Tanika's folders, the boy's careful plastic, the driver's cookies. She thought of the way gravity works on reputations and cups. Her phone buzzed. A message from a number with no label. "We were wrong." No signature. She considered not answering, then typed, "Learn." She put the phone down. Face dark. Outside, winter pressed its palm to glass without malice. Somewhere, a choir rehearsed for Sunday without accosting any gods. Down the block, 3B watered a plant and checked the window and felt good about a small note correctly placed. Up the block, someone hammered a hinge into a door and made a private click. No one else would hear. Alani placed the shard on the mantel where the cup had lived. Not an altar, an exhibit. She set the hinge beside it, a tool, not a symbol. In the kitchen, water ran into a kettle that would sing when it was ready. The city exhaled enough to make space for another inhale. She stood in her own doorway and felt the weight of an hour that had cost and an hour that had paid. The kettle sang. She reached for a different cup, cheap, durable, undeserving of epic, and poured heat into it like rehearsal. Outside, a wind shaped by buildings announced itself as weather and not command. Somewhere, a judge's pen found one last line to underline. Somewhere else, a woman counted minutes between two shifts and found a number that did not frighten her. She lifted the cup. In the quiet, a memory made a sound like a hinge, doing its work small, precise, sufficient. Then the city kept going.